Hello, my name is Olivia Mattis, and on behalf of the Sousa Mendes Foundation, welcome to today's program. Today is part of our Sunday series of beautiful stories of rescue, resistance, and hope. And normally we do present a story to do with the Holocaust, but not always. Today we're focusing on an event from the 1970s, but one of our speakers today, who was one of the leaders of that story, one of the main characters in the story, Rami Sherman, is himself the son of Holocaust survivors. And he will be able to connect for you the significance of his own family's Holocaust history to his mission in 1976 to rescue a plane load of hostages from Entebbe, Uganda, and bring them to safety. There have been many films on this rescue, but there will be another one coming out from our other guest, Boaz Dvir. And we've presented Boaz's On a Wing and a Prayer. We also had him on another program talking about the Jewish James Bond. And so this is our number 3 program with Boaz as our moderator, host. So now it's my pleasure and privilege to turn the floor over to Boaz Dvir, who will start us out, and then he will introduce the hero that we have with us today. He doesn't like the word hero, but I apologize, I used it anyway, Mr. Rami Sherman. So Boaz, right now, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Olivia and Matt and the Sousa Mendes Foundation. Thank you everyone for joining us on what here in State College, Pennsylvania is a beautiful sunny afternoon. So if you're sticking out with us to hear this, we appreciate it. You could be out in the park or maybe at the beach, I don't know. So thank you. And I'm excited to tell you about Rami, but before we get going, or as we get going, we want to show you a video. This is a video I made with Retro Report, which is based in New York. So Matt, please play this video and we'll pick it up from there. Thank you.
President after president has expanded the footprint of U.S. Special Operations. How did Special Ops become so central to America's warfighting?
Can Special Ops keep up the pace?
The story of how America became so dependent on these forces began with an unusual event almost 5 decades ago, when someone yelled fire on a crowded plane.
Everybody turns around to look at what's happening there, and there are 2 people who each have a hand grenade in their hand and a gun.
Suddenly, we heard on the intercom a man speaking in English with a German accent who said that we've changed directions, but if we'll behave and follow instructions, nothing bad will happen to us.
At the end, he said, "Thank you for flying Air France," and, hung up.
The plane had been hijacked by a group of German radicals and members of a Palestinian liberation organization.
They want the freedom of 53 prisoners. If Israel and the other countries accept to release those prisoners, no harm will be done to us, they'll release us, and if not, it'll be different.
And he finished it with the words, "Now you know how the mind of a crazy German revolutionary works."
2,800 miles later, the plane touched down in Entebbe, Uganda, where the hostages were greeted by its leader, Idi Amin.
He says, "Look, these terrorists have full support of the Ugandan people." Now the building is surrounded with Ugandan soldiers armed with machine guns. So, I asked my father what's going to happen. He told me, we're probably dead meat because Israel never negotiates. He even made the argument, it's way too far for Israel to intervene.
Soon, 47 hostages were released in an attempt to entice the Israeli government to the table. Olivier Kojo was among them.
Alors c'était assez dangereux.
Vous avez quoi?
Des grenades et des boîtes d'explosifs.
Israeli intelligence, secretly planning an operation, was waiting for them.
They started asking me all kinds of questions like, how high is the grass out there? Can you see the lake from where you are? Which way do the doors open? Is it wall, window.
We never had to plan an operation which is so far away with so many soldiers. I was not afraid of being killed or being hurt. I was afraid of failure.
3 days later, lead pilot Joshua Shani guided a squadron of 4 Hercules C-130s through the darkness toward Entebbe Airport.
We landed normal landing, no big deal. In the middle of the runway, paratroopers jumped from the door. Their job was to conquer the control tower. I made the turn, I saw the terminal, it was quiet. The Entebbe situation was based on surprise.
Out the back of the Israeli plane, heavily armed commandos quickly drove a convoy that included a Mercedes chosen to resemble Amin's.
It took seconds and they were inside the building.
Our soldiers were beginning to come in. Then I thought that there would be bullets flying, and I covered myself with a mattress.
Within 51 minutes, the commandos had killed all the terrorists and Ugandan soldiers guarding the building. Then, they rushed the 102 remaining hostages onto the awaiting planes.
After we were satisfied, my instruction was, take off, you don't wait, go.
4 hostages were killed, as was the commando's leader, Lieutenant Colonel Yoni Netanyahu. But the world saw the bold operation as an extraordinary success.
Immediately you saw a trend. I'm talking about real countries like the US, of course, UK, Germany, Italian, all came to learn. It was like the whole world said, wow, they have chutzpah, these guys. They are damn good. Entebbe gave a green light to governments that there is maybe another way and not just to surrender.
What Joshua Shani, the lead pilot, is talking about is the fact that governments around the world were inspired by Operation Thunderbolt that took place in 1976, this operation we're discussing with you today, to take bolder action against terrorists. And you may wonder, what's the lesson for us here today, right? 45 years later. And to me, the lesson is, if we're gonna say that we believe in standing up to bullies, and I think we all agree, right? I mean, I think that's something that everyone agrees on. I've not heard anyone on the left or the right or anyone at all oppose the notion of standing up to bullies. We may have disagreements who the bullies are, but we believe in standing up to bullies. If we believe that, it's not enough to say it, we have to take action, and it often requires risk-taking. So in 1976, we were in the midst of the age of the hijack. What did that mean? It meant that, if you can believe this, it's hard to fathom. Every year, there were 300 hijackings around the world. Can you even imagine, would any of us even fly if there were 300 hijackings? Now, most of them ended non-violently, because most of the time, the terrorists will make demands and governments would meet those demands. Often, by the way, the United States of America, with so many of its planes taken to Cuba or to Latin America, and hijackers would have all sorts of demands, often money related, and they would get paid off. So we succumbed. And you might say, yes, but what about Israel? Israel stood up to terrorists. Israel never negotiates, right? That was the concept. That was the idea. And I think it remains to this day, this notion that Israel never negotiates with terrorists. Well, there's 2 things to know about that. Number one, during the Entebbe crisis, and I will let Rami tell you a little bit more about that, for a good portion of it, it was a week-long crisis, Israel felt it had no choice but to negotiate. And in fact, started negotiating in earnest. And Matt, maybe you can begin the slide now, and I'll begin them and I'll talk through them. And second, something else to note is Israel, even then, had already negotiated with terrorists. In fact, in 1968, an Israeli plane flying from Rome back to Tel Aviv, El Al, was hijacked by the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, the same organization that was key in this hijacking. That plane was taken to Algiers, where the hostage crisis didn't last a week, but actually lasted 40 days, at the end of which Israel, after having negotiated, gave up the 16 prisoners, all former terrorists, or really current terrorists, right, that the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine had demanded. So here we were, and joining the Popular Front was this terrorist, along with his colleague, another German terrorist. They were part of the revolutionary cells. They worked, by the way, very closely with other terrorists around the world, including Carlos the Jackal, for instance. Wilfred Boza had his hands in many operations, including supporting the Munich massacre. He wasn't directly involved, but he helped support them. So these were not, easy guys to deal with. And let's show the map right now, and I will show you. They took this plane, which had landed in Athens, Greece, to Benghazi, purely just to refuel, and then took it all the way down to Entebbe. I'm not sure what the map indicates to you, but Entebbe is very far away from Tel Aviv. You're talking about 2,000 miles. And at the time, it seemed impossible for Israel to do anything about this at all. There was a lot of mystery surrounding this too, right? When the plane first was taken from Athens to Benghazi, there was this notion that the terrorists might fly back to Tel Aviv. That had been done before. We had seen that happen before. And so the Israelis were bracing for that option. When it went to Entebbe instead, it was clear that it was never coming back to Tel Aviv, but there were other mysteries. And the biggest one initially was, did Entebbe represent simply a stopping point, a desperate stopping point for the terrorists, or did it actually indicate that they had the support of the Ugandans? Was Idi Amin, the ruler of Uganda, was he in cahoots with the terrorists? We didn't know that at the very beginning. We didn't know a lot in the very beginning. In the very beginning, we didn't know. Plane was hijacked on Sunday. Early Monday morning, it lands in Entebbe. And only the next day do we start to really find out what's going on. Only on the Tuesday of that crisis week. So Matt, if you can show the next slide. So this is the old terminal. See, the Ugandans had 2 terminals at the time in Entebbe. This was the old one. The new one was functioning. People were still flying in and out of the new terminal adjacent to this one while the crisis was going on. They were showing their passports, they were getting them stamps, they were going to the duty-free shop and buying cigarettes and souvenirs. Life went on and normal. Well, 250 hostages were held in this old terminal. The terrorists were inside and outside. The Ugandan soldiers, about 30 at a time, surrounded it. They were up on the control tower. They slept on the 2nd floor, and they were there. And they were clearly in cahoots with the terrorists. And I can give more examples as to how we know that. Get more into the weeds if anyone's interested when we get to the questions. So the Israelis sent a reconnaissance plane to take photos of the area and try to get an idea as to what was going on. General Bar-Lev, who was friends with Idi Amin, called them to try to fish out some information and start to build it. But then Tuesday came along, and 2 key developments happened that really set the scene for what would lead to the rescue mission, the most daring rescue mission of its kind at the time. So the first thing that happened was the selection. You see, they took these 250 people and stuck them in one big main dusty hole. It was very crowded. And then under the excuse of maybe providing more space for the passengers, the former passengers, the leader, Wilfred Boza, who already had possession of all the passports because they already took them from the passengers, gathered everyone around, took out the passports, and started calling out names, having already instructed the Ugandan soldiers to make a hole, to break through a hole in the wall to an adjacent smaller room. And then he started to read names. And name after name was a Jewish name, which led to, first of all, a lot of tension. We believe that there were a couple of dozen Holocaust survivors among the 250 passengers. This is also 1976. We're very close to the Holocaust, right? It's not that far. People are only starting to grapple with what the Holocaust was. And here you have a German terrorist with a German accent calling out Jewish names and bashing them into what appears to be, substandard living conditions. As you might imagine, many people felt like this was a repeat, maybe, of what they saw in the Holocaust. And this myth grew out of it, and I totally understand this myth. It makes sense that these terrorists separated the Jews from the non-Jews. They didn't. What they were trying to do, not totally successfully, by the way, but what they tried to do was to separate the Israelis from the non-Israelis. Most of the 250 hostages were Jewish, and many of them stayed in the main hall. But nonetheless, this idea of separation, whether, by the way, it was just, Israelis versus non-Israelis, certainly changed the whole tone of this crisis, particularly for the Israeli military and the Israeli leadership, which Rami will talk about some more. Then the second thing that happened on that Tuesday, now we're 2 days into the crisis, was that the terrorists finally announced their demands. So what did they want? They wanted the release of 53 prisoners, most of them obviously terrorists, 40 of whom they believed were held in Israel, 13 of whom they believe were held by 4 other countries, France, Switzerland, Germany, and they thought Kenya. We find out later that the prisoners, the 2 or 3 prisoners that they wanted released from Kenya were actually already in Israel, but they didn't know that. So those were their demands. And now Israel has a clear picture to what is going on. They understand that Idi Amin is protecting the terrorists. They know that Uganda is very far away, and that to most of the world, including, by the way, the prime minister of Israel at the time, the only way to really release these hostages to save their lives was to negotiate. So with that, I'm going to take you to Rami. Rami at the time was an officer in the Sayeret Matkal, better known as the unit, Israel's elite commando fighting force. During that week, they were already on a mission, a separate fighting mission in the Sinai, initially not really even thinking that they would ever get involved in such a thing as this Entebbe hostage crisis. Rami was the number 3 commander of this unit. Yoni Netanyahu was the top commander, Muki Bester was number 2, and Rami, my friend, was number 3. And with that, I'll give you Rami Sherman.
Thank you all. And I would like to move directly to what was said. On Wednesday, 2 things happened. The first important thing which happened, that on Wednesday afternoon, 2 Air France flights arrived to Entebbe without even thinking why the French government sent the 2 Air France flights to Entebbe. And as Boaz said, they took out from Entebbe 140 hostages, passengers, and in Entebbe left 105 passengers, hostages, most of them Israeli Jews, and some of them Jews from different parts of the world. Why it's so important? Because till Wednesday afternoon, the government of Israel look at the situation as it's a question what French government will do in such a situation. And then somehow, without even understanding why, the French government took a step ahead and took out 140 passengers out from Uganda. And that put very, very strong pressure on the government of Israel, because the government of Israel understood from now on it's a question of Israel to decide what to do. They can't put too much tension on the French government. And on Wednesday night was a very, very important government meeting. The Israeli government sat. You can see the picture from the right. It's Shimon Peres. He was a defense minister at that time. In the middle, Yitzhak Rabin. He was a prime minister at that time. And on the left is the chief of staff, Mota Gur. Three of them, they were the most important people in the meeting to discuss what Israel should do. They knew it's far away from Israel, almost 4,000 kilometers away from Israel. They knew that the policy at that time, Israel is not negotiate with the terrorists, but fight them, but there is no military plan. Nobody thought that Israel can send force down to Entebbe. The chief of staff, Mota Gur, was against any action. It's quite surprised because usually the general of the army, they push for action and the civilians stop them. He was against. He said it's too risky. We haven't got enough information. We don't know exactly what happened on the ground over there in Entebbe. We don't know the routes. Who is the enemy on the routes down on the flight to Entebbe? And he was against. Shimon Peres, as a defense minister, pushed very strong for action. And Yitzhak Rabin was in the middle. And it's a Thursday morning, the government of Israel came out, quite surprised, with a decision. And they announced it loudly through the media. We accept what the terrorists ask. We need time to organize everything with other countries. And the terrorists delay the ultimatum of killing the hostages to Sunday, 4th of July. That was the official decision on Thursday morning. In less than 2 hours, I found myself on a plane, on an Hercules, a heavy carrier plane to Entebbe. In 2 days, it's impossible to organize such an operation. It's impossible to think of every little things in the operation. And it's a very important question, why we succeed. Why? Because we couldn't think on everything. So many things, it was unknown situation. On Thursday afternoon, a very important man, a Israeli man, took a small aircraft and flew over to Entebbe to take a picture from the airport. And then, as he arrived close to the airport, he told the Ugandan on the airport that he has some mechanical problem and he must land in the airport. And they told them, no, it's impossible. And by the time he negotiated with the Ugandan, he did a few circles and took many pictures from the airport. And then he was alone, the first Israeli who landed in Entebbe. Not me, when we arrived late Saturday evening, but one soldier from the Mossad, the most famous intelligence service, landed alone in Entebbe. And he tried to get a right to see the hostages. The Ugandans stopped them from going there, and he flew back to Nairobi in Kenya and sent over to Israel the film, which arrived to Israel sometime late Friday night. And that brought some information, what happened. The other way to get information was by asking, as we saw in a video clip, many questions, the hostages who released to Paris. Israel sent investigators to Paris and asked many questions, and we got some information. But remember, it was information which standing on Wednesday afternoon. Many things could change. whatever they said. One of the important things from, unfortunately, our experience, when you fight with terrorists, you should ask yourself all the time, how could we surprise the terrorists? Because the question, who is shooting first, it's a critical point. It's a critical point, who is shooting first? Either we kill the terrorist, or the terrorist first action will be to kill the hostages. And from my experience, I was in quite a few of terror attacks in Israel. Sometimes we felt, and hostages, civilians, they were killed. Some of my friends killed. But always we thought, how could we surprise the Ugandan soldiers over there in the airport and the terrorists? We knew more or less there is about 10 terrorists. It's quite a big team. And the idea of going down to the terminal, to the old terminal, as Idi Amin convoy car came to the table. And we thought it's too crazy. It's like James Bond movie. It's impossible to create such a movie as a real action. But as the hours move on, we understood that is the only way to surprise the terrorists in the Ugandan army. And we brought an old Mercedes and we painted black. And we put Ugandan flag on the front and Ugandan number. You saw the real one on a video clip. And then we realized the car in Israel, the wheel is just opposite than the Ugandan, because all the cars over there in Uganda, it's like in England. They drive on the left side, not as we are, as America and Israel on the right side. But still, the God probably was with us. Otherwise, there is no chance to explain how we succeed with such things. Then we arrived to Saturday, 3rd of July. In the morning, we sat in our unit, Yoni Netanyahu, the brother of Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister of Bibi, the brother of Bibi, and all the officers from our unit, we sat and we discussed the situation. And we thought we are not ready to do such an operation because it's too short and we haven't got time to discuss. We try to do our mission with a zero mistake. And it's impossible in 2 days. But we told to ourselves, no government could take a decision to send us over to Entebbe. Then at 1 o'clock, we were loaded on 4 Hercules, 240 soldiers, 8 cars. Look what was the situation on the first Hercules where I was. Shuki Shani was the captain of the Hercules. We were 55 soldiers, 3 cars, no seat, no air condition, no windows, very noisy flight, but the most difficult, you can understand it all, no toilet. We empty Coca-Cola bottle to prepare ourselves a very new toilet. We prepare sandwiches for ourselves. And we knew that it could take 9 hours flight. It's not a short period, 9 hours flight. And the same time, the government of Israel said to discuss, do they give us a green light to land in Entebbe or not? At 1:30, we took off from Tel Aviv airport down to Sharm el-Sheikh, the most south airbase at that time. 1:30, 4 Hercules took off, remember, Saturday, and we flew only 30 meters above the ground, only 30 meters. Why we flew so low? Because we're afraid that the radar with the surround country around Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, if they realize that there is heavy carrier plane, Hercules, on the air, one-on-one it's 2. Probably they are on the way down to Entebbe. And in one phone call, they could put over there in Entebbe a track on a runway and everything stopped. So we flew only 30 meters, very hot day, a lot of turbulence. The plane jumped up and down. Many soldiers vomited. And I would like to put a short word about the reason why soldiers vomited. Remember, all the soldiers, they were volunteers. We asked each one of the soldiers if they want to be on a plane without knowing how it looks like Entebbe. How does it look, Africa? We didn't know, of course. First of all, the flight condition was very, very difficult. And sometimes we know from our experience, we feel bad. Second, the days before was very, very difficult and tension hours. So it helped to the flight condition to make it even worse. But the last is the most important, why I put focus on that. We are human beings. Even I was 23 years old. Even most of the soldiers, they were more or less in my age and even younger. The fear was on the air. And the question, many times people ask me, did you afraid? Of course we're afraid. To go to Entebbe without knowing what will be the next, without knowing what Idi Amin could do. Many stories run in head. The only question, how you control this fear and how you react and not give the fear to control you. Then we landed in Sharm el-Sheikh. As I said, very hot day. We went out for a refresh, to drink something, to walk. And then the 33 soldiers who should be on the front of fighting with the terrorists on the old terminal, as we saw on the pictures, we changed our uniform to Ugandan army uniform. It's very important point. We tried to surprise, and we said, might be, as we run in as Ugandan uniform, might be the Ugandan hesitate to shoot, might be the terrorists afraid to shoot if they saw us as Ugandan soldiers. We'll see later what happened. Then at 3:30 p.m., before the government decided to give us a green light to land, we took off from Sharm el-Sheikh down the Red Sea to Entebbe. And now, Olivia, who was the real hero of the operation, was a pilot. To flew 3 hours, only 30 meters above the sea. It's so difficult. I don't know how many of you has a license to take a plane over the sea. To flew over 30 meters above the sea, it's so difficult. When there is turbulence, when the plane jumped up and down, on the front was a sandstorm. They were the real heroes, the pilots, not us. Of course, we couldn't see anything. I was a bit lucky that I could walk into the cockpit and watch outside and see what happened. That's all. Then 6:30 was dark already. We were somewhere around Ethiopia. We got a message from the government. We took the chance. We can land in Entebbe. Yitzhak Rabin, as a prime minister, said a very warm welcome and gave to his secretary a letter that if we felt, he will resign. And then later, he asked, what you mean felt? What was in your head? And he said, if would be more than 25 casualties, that mean felt. And we flew, we talked about the possibility. And the number of casualties that we thought could be either from the hostages or from us run between 30 and up. That's what we thought could happen. As we arrived to the top of the mountain in Ethiopia, somehow, sometimes it's as a joke, I said that the God wants to see how much we are serious. A tropical storm started. And for the next 2 hours, I don't know how many of you know what is mean tropical storm. I didn't know when I was on a plane, on a forward plane who crossed the storm. The plane ran from side to side, 4 Hercules, in a silent communication, no light. The hills which hit the plane was a sound that someone shooted all the time and hit the plane. We're afraid that we are going to crash on the ground. And it's a long, long time, 2.5 hours. As we arrive above Lake Victoria, somehow everything finished. And the last hour was very, very smooth flight. 20 minutes before we prepare ourselves to land in Entebbe, the 4 Hercules open gap of about 7 minutes flight between each other. We were on the front, and on 11.1, only 1 minute delay of what the Air Force planned. Only 1 minute's delay. Try to imagine in such a difficulty flight, only 1 minute's delay of what we planned. The first Hercules will touch the ground. The airport was full of light. The Ugandans on the new control tower didn't understand who is the plane who just landed. It was the middle of the night, and we landed. And we planned to move till the end of the runway. As we arrived to the end, nobody ran toward us. The back door opened, the Mercedes, the black Mercedes, and behind was 2 Land Rover Jeep, only 33 soldiers. We drove toward the old terminal. Remember, Boaz said the airport was active, and we drove toward the old terminal, which was building beside the active part of the airport. We saw the light, and we drove toward the airport. As we arrived to the airport, to the old terminal, we stopped the cars. It was quiet. Nobody understood that it is possible that the Israel will send force toward Entebbe. Nobody thought that it could happen. And I was on a jeep behind the Mercedes. How that could happen, I asked myself. After such a long flight, in such a condition, we landed in Entebbe, and we are standing on the front of the terminal. In a minute, in a second, we will start to fight, and nobody knew that the Michiganer, if someone knows Yiddish, how the crazy people could be there. The plan was very simple, and it's a question of a good luck and surprise. You need the God to be next to us. Otherwise, you never know how that will end. We divided to 6 teams. Each team has duty. Each team contains 5, 6 soldiers. We don't have to talk too much between each other. Everyone should do his duty. My team duty was to stay outside and to defense all the force if they are coming from the back. As the soldiers went out from the cars, Yoni Netanyahu, the leader of the 33 soldiers, was on the front, and he started to run as quick as possible to the corner where he can push the 3 teams into the doors who prepare to go into the hall. As we ran from the car, somehow on the top of the old control tower was either soldiers, Ugandan soldiers, or terrorists, we don't know exactly. Very heavy fire open. And he was hit at the first 5 to 7 seconds and fall down. But we knew nobody should stop, but we should run as quick as possible to be in touch with the terrorists. Otherwise, they will kill all the hostages. Only the doctor stopped next to him and tried to stop his bleeding. I tried with my team to stop the fire from the control tower. It was very, very difficult. As the first soldiers arrived to the main door, someone from inside opened fire, but he wasn't hit. He ran in and saw the 2 German, the lady and the man, beside prepared to shoot him, but he was the first one and killed them. The other terrorists tried to shoot him, but his friend killed the terrorist before he had a chance to kill these soldiers. It took 5 minutes, might be 6, not longer than that. 7 terrorists killed, 20 Ugandan soldiers killed. They were on the 2nd floor. Unfortunately, 2 hostages killed because as we ran in, one soldier held the megaphone and told by Hebrew, English, and French, "We are Israeli. Don't stood up, don't run." But of course, remember, we were with Ugandan uniform in the middle of the night, and they tried to escape from the crossing fire, and one of the soldiers, unfortunately, shoot and kill them. 1 hostage killed by terrorists, and the last I will talk later. At the end was Doabloch. As the fire was a bit slowed down and came with the car and took Yoni Netanyahu, the commander, to the plane where the doctor tried to stop his bleeding, but unfortunately, he was died after some minutes in the plane. As I was drove back 600 meters by myself in the middle of the airport, in the middle of the night, the other force, which arrived with other Hercules, stopped the fire, and it was quiet. And now came the most important part of the operation, to take all the hostages from the terminal to the plane who wait to take them out from Entebbe. Even we told them we are Israeli, they were shocked. Some of them went out with a night clothes, without shoes. Most of them, they took their suitcase, their bag, their personal bag on their hand. Of course, the mother took the babies on their hand. And we start to walk. And at that moment, something happened to me. I don't know from where the voice came. I hear a voice, Rami, you save life of Jews. And for me, personally, as the one who born in Israel, in a kibbutz in Israel, to a Holocaust survivors, from my mother's side, all the family murdered in Poland. From my father's side, only him and his sister survived. But I grew up as an Israeli and very much occupied on all the ideology of the Zionist organization and movement and ideology. And now I hear a voice, you save life, and I was so proud to lead 105 hostages, Israeli Jews, Jews from the world, and 12 air crew of Air France flight, led by Captain Michel Bacos, who decided to stay with his passengers as the captain of the flight. Even he had a chance to leave on Wednesday night, they decided, all the air crew, to stay with the Jews, not to leave them alone. I think his message of being together, support the passengers, hostages, who can't do anything, and in a second, he could kill, the passengers could kill, without knowing the next day, he decided to stay. And I think he is like many other, as well as Alcides de Santos Mendes. He took a chance because humanity. And I was walking without not knowing what next. In a second, someone could open fire in a darkness night over there in Entebbe, and I walked toward the plane. And as we arrived to the plane was with full power, very noisy, everywhere was dark, and now you should be ready to take all the hostages. How do you know that you took all the hostages out from the terminal? It wasn't easy to count them. There is no seat. All of them, they were on the ground. And all the time we miss one. And by the end, after 52 minutes, the first Hercules took off from Entebbe toward Israel. 52 minutes, the first Hercules left Entebbe. After another 50 minutes, the last one, I was on the last one, all of us, we flew over to Nairobi, and after refueling in Nairobi, we took for another 7.5 hours flight back to Israel. And on 4th of July, Sunday morning, we crossed 3:30 a.m. in the morning, somewhere around Sudan, the BBC announced that the Israeli force released the hostages, but was many hours to cross with a very dangerous situation. And then at 10:30 in the morning, we landed in Tel Aviv airport. Please, Matthews, please the pictures. Here you can see in 2-3 hours, thousands of Israelis arrived to the airport. Not only the family members, but almost everyone who could arrive to the airport wait to see from the most bottom depression situation the hostages, to touch the historical moment of the surprise. Here you can see the captain of the Hercules. They took him out from the Hercules and took him on their shoulders and started to dance. No one understood how that could happen. Nobody knew, of course, there is no mobile phone as today. All over the world, the Jews started to dance, and they joined by many others who support Israel at that moment. This operation showed the world that there is many ways to fight terror, not always by fighting, but we should change our attitude to show that we have a right to live as an innocence, not as an army, but as an innocence. We have a right to live, to enjoy life, to create families. And that was the message of the operation. Unfortunately, on Sunday morning, as Idi Amin understood our success, he told to his force to take Dora Bloch. Dora Bloch was one of the passengers. She flew over to New York for a wedding of one of their family members. On Friday afternoon, she swallowed a fishbone and took over to Kampala, to hospital, to help her. And as Idi Amin understood that we succeeded, told to his force to take it out from a bed in hospital, and she was murdered. And together with her, 2 doctors and 2 nurses, Ugandan citizens, they were murdered as well because they want to help her. And 250 Kenyatic citizens, they were murdered as well by Idi Amin force. It took 3 years when Idi Amin threw out from office and other leaders took power in Uganda. And me, after 3 days, I was in a funeral of Yoni Netanyahu. And the day after, I was occupied of preparing other operation, a secret operation for the security of the state. It wasn't anything important but to work for the country, to give the citizen of Israel a right to live as normal life like everyone else around the world. And I did what I prepare myself as an Israeli. But 4 years ago, now please the last slide. 4 years ago, I flew to Entebbe again to a 40th anniversary of the operation. It was very much welcomed by the Ugandan army soldiers. And I understood so much who I am. I flew to Entebbe as a Israeli in 1976. I flew back from Entebbe as a Jew, but it took me 40 years to understand it. And I can add to understand that there is a message in this operation of humanity, of give a right to survive for everyone. Doesn't matter if he is a Jew or Christian or Muslim. We have a right to live and to help each other. And the last, we need a good luck. And if we believe on him, we need him to be next to us. Thank you, Olivia.
There's so many questions that are piling up in the chat box, and we want to get to as many as possible. So I do ask your patience. I ask you to stay longer. Usually we have a 1-hour program, and today we'll be running over, and justifiably so. But before we get to your questions, I do want to tell you a little bit about upcoming programs. So later this afternoon, you will be getting an email with information about our next 5 upcoming programs. But right now, I'm only going to tell you about next week. So interestingly enough, our featured speaker next week was herself born in Uganda under Idi Amin, and she was a refugee from that country as a child, and she grew up in Canada. Her name is Irshad Manji. She wrote this very important book called The Trouble with Islam Today, and we are offering copies of this book signed and inscribed by the author. So that's a very rare opportunity that I hope you will have a chance to take advantage of. She will be in dialogue with Abe Foxman of the Anti-Defamation League. Irshad Manji has devoted her career to reforming Islam, which is quite a challenge. She was kicked out of her madrasa for asking too many questions as a child in Canada. She asked, why can't I be friends with Christians and Jews? And for that, she was kicked out. So she has been speaking out for the rights of women and the rights of LGBT people in the Muslim world, and also, and in particular, to try to eradicate the scourge of anti-Semitism from the Muslim world, which is quite a tall order. Now, Abe Foxman also has a book that he will be signing and inscribing. It's actually his father's Holocaust memoir called In the Shadow of Death. And there's an introduction by Abe Foxman to this book by Joseph Foxman. So Abe Foxman is quite keen for you to have a copy of his father's memoir, and I hope that you will take advantage of that as well. So again, there's going to be information in that email after today's program. Right now, I want to show you a little video clip of Irshad Manji speaking about a turning point in her own life that led to her lifelong mission.
There's no doubt that I've made many cowardly decisions in my life. I've self-censored on any number of occasions, but I think the one that stands out for me was when I was in the 9th grade, and I had a Jewish teacher who was subjected to a great deal of anti-Semitism from fellow classmates. And I remember walking into the classroom. He was my English teacher, Mr. Goldman. And I remember walking into the classroom one afternoon and seeing swastikas in chalk on all of the blackboards. And I looked at my fellow classmates who were giggling, and I looked at the swastikas, and I looked back at my fellow classmates, and Mr. Goldman had not yet entered the room. And I just took my seat, and I said nothing. And he walked into the room, and his eyes welled up with tears, as I feel like mine are doing right now. And he took the brush and cleaned off the blackboards, didn't say a word, and went on with the English lesson. What I can't tell you I did to begin to redeem myself is I came up to him after the class was over and told him how profoundly sorry I was that I didn't say anything to the class. And he said, well, why should you? You weren't the one who put those swastikas on the blackboard, were you? I said, no, I wasn't, sir. And he said, then it's not your responsibility. And I said, in fact, it is my responsibility. You know why? Because I knew that that was wrong. If I didn't know it was wrong, maybe I could let myself off the hook, because then there would be nothing to struggle with. But I knew that was wrong, and I said nothing. And I think that moment, needless to say, has stayed with me for my entire life. And though I don't know it, most of the time when I speak up, it is with the spirit of that moment in my conscience.
So Irshad Manji is the founder of the Moral Courage Institute. She has actually created a curriculum to teach moral courage. She certainly exemplifies it. Rami Sherman certainly exemplifies it. And Aristide de Souza Mendes and the other heroes of the Holocaust that we honor exemplify it as well. So we will be digging down deep next week into what is moral courage, such a central question. Now, most of our programs, our Sunday programs, as you undoubtedly know, are free of charge. But every once in a while, we do sell tickets because that's what pays for the rest of the month. And next week's program is one such program where there are tickets. So it's by donation. It's free. It's a free choice of whatever donation you would like to donate to our efforts of Holocaust remembrance. We are a nonprofit organization and it's tax deductible. We do suggest $18 or high life as a suggested donation amount. But if you wish to give more, if you wish to give less, that's fine, whatever is comfortable for you. So now let's get to your questions. Starting with, there are a number of questions asking, Rami, please unmute yourself if you would. There are a number of questions asking, how did you obtain Ugandan military uniforms?
On Friday, many saw company saw it in Israel, in Tel Aviv. We asked them, and what funny things I can say, not everyone was in a good size for each one of the soldiers. So I was in a bit big one, soldiers, and the other was so tight like a modern, jeans, as we use today, because there is no chance, whatever got, we should use it. So that way we got a Ugandan uniform.
That's amazing.
To add to that, the background, Uganda and Israel a few years earlier were very close. And Idi Amin was a close ally of Israel, came to Israel a few times, walked around even in 1976 with Israeli paratrooper wings, which was a lie. He never did fly and do the course, but he pretended to. So there was a lot of connection there between prior to him turning against Israel.
Yes, very much so.
Is it true that you had a little mock-up, a little maquette of the Entebbe airport in Israel to work from, to plan the operation?
Yes. From the middle of the 60s till 72, had a very strong connection with Israel and Uganda and other African countries. And Israeli company built the terminal over there. And we got a blueprint of this building. That's why we knew exactly all the doors and the rooms and the stairs in the building. And we knew the airport as well, because the pilot took a very good pictures of the plane. One of them we saw on the slide. This picture took by this pilot.
Were you concerned that they would realize that you were not Ugandan because of the color of your skin?
Very much so. we flew over, first of all, without any plan B. There is no military action, doesn't matter without military choice. If that getting wrong, what we do? The pilot got American dollars in cash in case we should pay to the fishermen to take it from one side of the lake to the other side. And we try, you know, in American movie, they show that we paint our face as a black soldiers, but it wasn't true. We were with Ugandan uniform, but with a Polish face, as a Jewish Polish. Well, and we knew that it's a question of luck in some way or another. Of course, we were the best soldier on the ground, but without a good luck, it would be disaster.
Now, several people want to know about other countries. Boaz, maybe you would like to address this. Were there other countries either apprised of your mission or involved in your mission in any way?
So the other countries did not know. No one knew. In fact, even the United States was surprised by this. No one told anyone anything, and they had to hide it. Most Israelis obviously didn't know. Only a select few knew about this. And the people involved, Shimon Peres, in the middle of the crisis, had to go to a bar mitzvah and pretend to, know nothing, etc. But when Israel started negotiating, really even leading up to negotiation, Israel did coordinate with the other countries that held the prisoners. And that was a tricky thing because Israel thought really for most of the crisis that they would have to actually release hostages. But they were demanding prisoners. They were demanding 13 prisoners from 4 other countries. And so Israel had to coordinate that with France, with Switzerland, with Germany. That did take place.
I would like to add one thing to remember. Was the help of group of people, a Christian people, who helped a lot to Israel to create that operation. There were a Christian people who were in Kenya. One of the important men called Bruce Mackenzie, but he wasn't alone, of course, but he was one of the important person who helped a lot to open Kenya as a back country. Without his help, probably it was impossible to bring the operation to be a real. He prepares the airport, the international airport of Uganda. He prepares the hospital in Nairobi, the international airport in Nairobi, and the hospital over there. A lot of things. Unfortunately, 2 years after, as Idi Amin understood how much Kenya people was involved, he called him. He was a minister, agricultural minister in Kenya government, yes, sorry. He called him to Uganda to discuss, to open a new relation with the two countries. And was a beautiful meal and talk and by the end, Idi Amin gave him a big head of a lion. And as Bruce Mackenzie crossed the lake on the way back to Nairobi, the head exploded and he was killed together with all his stuff. And he paid in his life for the operation. And we have to remember him. He helped a lot for creating the operation.
What makes the Kenyans involvement even more extraordinary, it was a small group of people who really kept it tight and did not even tell their president that they were doing this, to protect the president and to protect the country, so that Kenya officially would not at all be involved. They would take responsibility. It was really amazing, really, truly amazing. I agree.
Now, there is a question about that famous Mercedes. What happened to it?
So as we were back, we asked to pay by using this old car, but we were soldiers. How could we pay by using that? So we told someone, look, could you solve this question of pay using 2 days the Mercedes? And they took the Mercedes back to the garage and paint it again with white and fix it. And somehow, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but someone told me this Mercedes arrived to the East Jerusalem person. He bought it from someone in Israel and used it. But I don't know if it's true or not, but that's the story.
And Boaz, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your upcoming film.
Yeah, so this film, Kojo, is about a protagonist named Michel Kojo, and the film deals with certain aspects of his life that are quite fascinating, but one in particular is the fact that he was a hostage in Entebbe. He and his 12-year-old son, Olivier, were flying from Israel back to Paris, where they lived. Of course, the detour happens in Athens. By the way, it was an unscheduled layover, something also crazy about the times. We don't have that. You buy a non-stop flight today, you get to your destination. Back then, they could announce as you got on a plane, oh, we're going to make a stop. And when they announced that they were stopping in Athens, Michel Kojo and his son Olivier exchanged worried looks. It was the age of hijacking, and Athens in particular was known for having very lax security. And when they were hijacked and everyone was freaking out, Michel Kojo had a different expression on his face. He actually, and he was not trained in any particular way, but he saw it as his opportunity to be a sort of a hero. And so he became the liaison between the hostages and the hijackers and the Ugandans. He spoke multiple languages, he translated for everyone, and he's the one who negotiated the release of 2 groups of hostages. The first on Wednesday, 47 hostages, the sick, the elderly, the young, and a second group of 100 hostages that Friday. In addition, and this made it very crucial, because he had so much access, because he was with the terrorists all the time, and he was the one guy who could go anywhere he wanted in the terminal. The terrorists trusted him, liked him, bonded with him, particularly Boza, the head, but also even the Peruvian, who was the leader of the Palestinians on the ground there. Because of all that, he had intimate knowledge that the Israelis needed. So when they interviewed him, he gave them key components for their strategy, for Israel to pull this off. And the most important piece of information he gave, you could say, was a contributing factor to the green light that the government eventually gave. So when the hostages were released that Wednesday, they were asked by the Mossad agents, was the terminal rigged? In other words, did the terrorists place explosives around and inside the terminal such that a rescue operation would ignite the whole place and everyone dies, right? And the hostages said yes, because the terrorists and Idi Amin and everybody else told them that. They told them, we rigged this terminal. And then most of the hostages that came on Friday repeated that. And Michel Kojo said, no. They did not do that. He said, listen, Idi Amin's soldiers are right above it. He loved his soldiers. They will have all died in this explosion, number one. He wouldn't have done that. Number two, I had it checked. I had him check the containers that they claimed had explosives, and they did not. And when the Israelis got that information from someone that they knew they could trust, Michel Kojo, who was so precise with his delivery of information, they said, okay, we might have a shot here. I could go on, but I know we're running out of time.
Well, we're over time, but I don't think, I think people are riveted. But now we will be going to our final thoughts. So let's start with you, Mr. Rami Sherman. What an honor it's been to have you. Tell us, what are your final thoughts for our audience?
One of the important things which I would like to share as an Israeli citizen, as a Jew, as a second generation of Holocaust survivor, I'm still a human being. I still think about how could we create a better world when people can support each other, understand each other, see each other as a right to live. In the last 4 years, I was around the world and share the story, mostly not from the military perspective, but from the values of life. What many people should take after 45 years since the operation. It's not only military action. It's a question of why there is so much terror in the world, why there is people who decide to put their life not as important as other, but after the other, to help other people. Like Astridas de Santos Mendes, like Janos Korczak in the Holocaust period, like Cujo, like Captain Michel Bacos and the staff. People put themselves for a value. They said that is more important than personal interest. Sometimes it's a question of life. And I think that we should put this voice loudly to remember we are innocent people and we have a right to live. This year, hopefully, it will happen. I try to create a meeting in Uganda with the Ugandan people, talk about humanity, come out from the operation. It's not a meeting of military people, but citizens from both countries. Hopefully, the corona will give us a chance to do it. And I hope I will get a chance to be together with you, Olivia Mendes Institute, to do something together, talk about the kibbutz, talk about life, because it's a privilege and honor to be today together with all of you, so many people. And what I did, I tried to save life of others.
Thank you, Rami. Boaz.
Yes, so Operation Thunderbolt was a turning point. It was the beginning of the end of the age of the hijack. In the next few years, it faded away, thankfully. It also changed the way the West dealt with hijacking and terrorists. They started to develop and employ special forces. Germany started its own special forces, sent its officers to Israel to train, among other countries as well. And a year later, faced a similar kind of situation, although in a friendly country, so not quite as difficult. But this time in Mogadishu, where one of their planes was hijacked 6,000 miles away. And they pulled off a similar operation and succeeded in rescuing more than 80 hostages from the plane. Then, of course, America's Delta Force a few years later, that was also born out of Operation Thunderbolt, did not have as much luck in rescuing the hostages in Iran, but attempted and went on. But also terrorists have changed since then. You see, we talk about not negotiating, and that's great, and we shouldn't and all that, but they don't give us the opportunity to negotiate anymore. You know, terrorism has changed. It went from a secular kind of, I don't want to say reasonable, but you could talk to them, right? You could deal with them on some level. They were fanatics, they were crazy, they were killing innocent people, but you could do something, to now, you know, it's a religious fundamentalist, polarizing type of approach that seems like it's from another world. I mean, the 9/11 terrorists did not negotiate first before they launched their attack, right? It's unheard of today. So we're in a different era, but we still have bullies, and we still have to remember to identify these bullies and stand up to them and be bold in our action and take the risk we need to take, because we don't have a choice. It's not easy, it's dangerous, but we have to do it to preserve our lives collectively and our freedom. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rami. Great talking to you.
What a great program. And see you all next week, I hope, and for our meetings to come. So be well. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.